In this week's In-Ear Insights, let's talk about business requirements. An awful lot of the time, people think of business requirements as sort of a unpleasant administrative must, a cost center, a waste of time even, when a lot of stakeholders and a lot of people who are talented practitioners are like, no, let's just do the thing. And yet, Katie, there may be a case for saying that business requirements can make you money. So tell us, how do business requirements make us some money?
Well, I want to walk backward a little bit. So they can be a waste of time if they're unfocused. And so, there's a right way and a wrong way to do business requirements. And so the wrong way is to just start asking everybody their opinion on, the thing that you're trying to build. It could be useful to gather that information, but if you don't plan on taking action with it or incorporating it, you're wasting your time, you're wasting their time. And quite honestly, they're going to be pretty angry that you wasted their time and didn't, take their opinions into consideration. The right way, and the way that can save you money and make you money, is to, start with something a little bit more focused, like a user story. As a persona, I want to, so that. Starting with that gives you some focus because it tells you the question that you're trying to answer. And so, Chris, you've recently been working with a fan base to save a Netflix show, Warrior Nun. And so the question that you're trying to answer is, how do you get the attention of a streaming service like Netflix or other streaming services and demonstrate the value of keeping certain programming? That's the question you're trying to answer. So everything you do, in addition to answering that question, should sort of roll back up into that. So any data that you're pulling, any people that you're talking to, any analysis that you're showing, anything relates to that, where you're posting it, how you're posting it, when you're posting it, needs to feed back up into that question of, as a fan of this TV show, I want to get the attention of Netflix so that they will uncancel it. Everything has to lead back up into that.
It's funny because I think I was channeling you in one of the fan group's team meetings, because I actually made them do this exercise, but I said, you need to put yourself in the shoes of a studio executive. Say, what's their user story? We know what our user story is, right? Yep. And we know, we want more of this content. What's their story? And so it took a little bit of doing, but eventually we got folks to realize, as a studio executive at a streaming service, I want to retain more subscribers so that my cost of acquisition goes down. Where as a studio executive, I want to acquire new subscribers so that I can make my numbers for the quarter.
Right.
And once we refocus through that lens, we're putting together a pitch deck, essentially, of all of the data that we've collected, like search data and social media data and streaming services data, reviews data, all this gets pulled together. But it basically said, it's trying to make the case, if you buy this thing, you will get this outcome. It follows the user story. If you buy this franchise, you will get this amount of loyal members and their multiplier effect in marketing, such that if you spend $1 on market with an avid fan base, you can have them multiply the impact of that dollar by like $100, because they'll share pretty much anything you tell them to share. And so once you have that user story, it's a focusing point where people can look at that and go, oh, so this thing I'm doing over here, that doesn't really matter for this. It's cool if you want to do it. And obviously in an all volunteer group, you can't tell people what to do. You're not paying them. But to help people to stay on task, it's like, here's the light the prism we're looking through. It's either got to bring in new subscribers or retain existing subscribers. That's what an exec's going to care about.
And so, it's interesting. So if we go into that, question of how do business requirements boost revenue? Well, I can see the two scenarios playing out where there's no business requirements and the exec says, I need to make my numbers. I need to get these subscribers. I know, let me go ahead and start creating net new content and see if I can attract subscribers. That's going to cost a lot of money. That's going to cost a lot of overhead, and it might not work, versus having requirements around, hey, what if I explore this fan base and see if I keep this show around, would they stick around? Would they be returning users? Would they, tell their friends who also want to be subscribers? And then I could make my numbers that way. And so you have two scenarios, one where you're just sort of shooting from the hip, probably spending a lot of money, maybe getting it wrong, versus doing your due diligence and saying, what does my subscriber base actually care about? Let me do more of that. And how can I really activate that subscriber base to be an advocate for me, for my streaming service, to bring in more users? That's not going to cost me anything. And so if we bring it into the context of a business, and so we are talking about business, but in terms of like a business that wants to, do A/B testing, or a business that wants to run an attribution model, answering the question about why you need to do the thing, why you want to do the thing, is going to continually focus, how you approach it. And so you can have your user story, but then you need to dig a little bit deeper and sort of follow the 5 Ps. So the purpose, your user story is your purpose. What is the question you're trying to answer? Why are you doing this thing? But then you should be able to understand, who are the people who need to be involved from an external standpoint, from an internal standpoint. What is the process that we're going to follow to answer this question? What platforms and data points do we need? And then what's the performance? What's our measure of success? And so those would be basic requirements. And so this exercise is not a time waster. This exercise actually tells you if you have all the components you need to answer the question, and or what you're missing. Because the biggest problem with a lack of requirements is, most of the time there's things missing that you aren't even aware of. And so you start to just do the thing because it's more interesting than documenting what you want to do. And then you're like, well, I'm actually missing 3 years worth of data, so I can't answer the question, but I've already wasted $50,000 trying to get this question answered. So I guess I might as well just keep going because I've already dug the hole.
Yep. And this concept of building requirements, technical requirements, business requirements, anything, it doesn't have to be huge. Right? It doesn't have to be some massive undertaking that creates an 800-page binder. I mean, sometimes it can be if it's like a $50 billion project. Yeah, you probably want to write that out on more than just a note card. But even in practical application on a small scale, these things are really important. And one of the things that it's really important for is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, when you're working with large language models, needs detail. If you go back to the live stream we did recently on how to do prompt engineering, one of the things that prompt engineering essentially is, if you do it well, is requirements gathering. So what we've got here, this is an example of a piece of code that I had ChatGPT write recently. This isn't the code. This is the prompt. These are the business requirements. I said, here's who you are. Here's the background information. Here's the steps. And here's the 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's what I need this piece of code to do. Right? And it's very clear what the requirements are, what format it should be in, what libraries it should be using, etc. Even if you're just working with AI as a single person, being able to write out your requirements is a massive time saver. It is a massive money saver, and it dramatically accelerates just how good the quality is that you get out of any of these AI-based tools.
So if you go into if you take a step back, so, whether it's AI or, if it's, a website or if it's a marketing campaign, doing the requirements first is that opportunity to work out any of the issues. Sort of the, play with the scenarios of like, well, let's say this does really well. What do we do? Let's say this doesn't perform well. What do we do? Can we accept the loss of dollars? So building in the time to document what you want to do, why, and how is actually what's going to make you money. Because without that, at least a thought to what it is you want to do and how you're going to approach it, there's no repeatability. First of all, repeatability is what's going to make you money, because that's where you have opportunities for automation, for artificial intelligence. Without sort of understanding what the intended outcome is meant to be, how do you know you were successful? Like, I can run an A/B test on anything, but how do I know it was successful or not? I don't know, because it performed better. Performed better how? Performed better for what? What was my intended goal? Why did I do it in the first place? Because I was bored, because I was curious. That's a waste of my time, and that's a waste of resources, because then I have to go back and look and say, well, what happened? And then I have to backtrack and say, why did I do this in the first place? What did I learn from this? And so when you think about business requirements making you money, you really need to think about it in terms of it's saving money up front. So I used to run a software development team. I think I've mentioned this before. I used to run a software development team, and they hated doing requirements. They thought it was the worst part. They just wanted to start developing. It is 10 times, at least 10 times more expensive to fix broken code and re-engineer features that were wrong and unusable and don't resonate with the market than it is to actually sit down and write down what the heck it is you want to do. And so I can hand these requirements, this blueprint, to my, team of developers, say, this is what I want you to do. And then they execute it and we get the intended outcome. Or I can say, I don't know, we're thinking that we want a contact form and, we want it to feed into our CRM. Good luck. It should be straightforward, but there's a lot of variables there. Like, how much information do we need to collect? Are there privacy guidelines that we don't want to violate? If we violate those, do we get hit with a legal fee? And, things that seem straightforward are often convoluted, which require having at least basic requirements. And so if you're listening to this podcast instead of watching the video, as I was talking about software engineers who don't want to do requirements, Chris was nodding along. So Chris, please talk to your experience.
Oh, it wasn't about that specifically. I was looking at my old Mr. Boston Deluxe Official Bartender's Guide. This is a whole bunch
as one does.
As one does. For example, Pike's Peak Cooler, juice of half a lemon, 1 teaspoon of powdered sugar, 1 egg. Shake well with cracked ice and strain into a 12-ounce Tom Collins glass and fill with hard cider and stir. Insert a spiral of orange and dangle over the end of the glass. You're probably wondering, what the heck does this have to do with requirements gathering?
I know exactly what it has to do with requirements gathering.
Recipes of requirements gathering, right? A recipe is the process and the platform that part of the 5 Ps, right? The purpose is you probably want to have something to drink. The people is who you are and who you're making the drinks for, right? So if you're making a drink for yourself, that's kind of self-explanatory. But there are definitely, when you're making a drink for somebody, like this person doesn't like whiskey. Well, this might not go so well then. And then the performance is, consuming the drink. But if you're thinking of requirements gathering as this big onerous thing, instead of just recipes, this is an easy way to explain it to people. The other thing that a recipe does, and this is again part of the making money. Katie, you said reproducibility, repeatability, right? So you can have the recipe, you open up and, okay, I'm going to make this thing again and again and again. And it may get boring making it, but I will consistently make it again and again and again. The other aspect is if it's reproducible, it is scalable. Right? I can now hire 10 bartenders. I give them 10 of the exact same recipe, and 9 out of the 10 are going to make a great drink. Then there's always the point of that one idiot. It's like, I can make this better. Like, no, follow the recipe. That's what we're selling. That's what the customer agrees to buy. But that's the other area where you make this money. And again, going to the AI example, if you are creating great requirements, which is what prompts are, you can scale that. You can have 100 API calls, 1,000 API calls, all using that same set of requirements, and you can dramatically scale the amount of stuff that you have AI making.
You said something that I want to highlight, something very important. It's what the customer agrees to buy. And so understanding what the customer expectation is the key to writing your business requirements. You start there and you work backwards. So, in your example, Chris, you're making, a certain kind of drink. The customer likely is ordering it because they have an expectation of what it is, what it contains, what it's going to taste like. And if you don't give them that because you're just kind of winging it, they're not going to be happy. And they're going to make you make another one on you. Like, you then have to pay for it. You're going to lose the money. And so it's at the end of the day, the requirements are how you meet the customer expectations. You can be the customer. You could be making the drink for you, but you specifically chose that drink because you want those things. Or you have a bar full of people who are ordering the thing. It's the same thing with an attribution analysis. The customer expectation, the end user, is that I will then be able to understand which things are helping convert, which things are getting the credit for the action. That's the customer expectation. And so if you are giving them a 101, piece about SEO, but you didn't give them an attribution analysis, you're like, well, I don't know, this kind of answers your question. Not really, not at all. They're going to be very upset, and everyone's time is going to be wasted. Time is money in this context, because it's resource time. It's time that you could have been doing something else. It's, time that you can't get back focusing on the wrong thing.
Exactly. You can always get more money. You can never get more time. Right? There's no amount of money that will buy a second of time. So if the requirements gathering, your business requirements, your technical requirements, if you do that well, if you get a good recipe, you will save yourself a lot of time. And that, again, that means you can scale. That also means you can invest more. You can do more R&D. You can do more innovation. Or you can just go get drunk on, something from Old Mr. Boston's Tilk's Bartender's Guide. No matter what happens, you've gotten that time back that you would have spent otherwise on fumbling around. And to your point, Katie, it's a partnership between you and the customer, right? The customer says, I want a martini. Cool. I mean, I can give you a vodka martini, which is not really a martini, but people like to pretend it is. Or I can give you a gin martini. And if you just say you want a martini, I'm going to give you a martini, right? It's going to have gin and an olive and stuff like that. But if that's not what you had in mind, that's your fault for not being specific in your requirements as the customer to say, I want a vodka martini with, raspberry absolute and a cucumber instead of an olive.
That sounds vile, by the way. But, we're talking about requirements in terms of one single person performing the action, building the thing. Think about larger teams. How does everybody know what role they need to play without some set of requirements? So the front-end designer needs to do this part. The back-end designer needs to do this part. The database architect needs to do this part. What are the components of the thing? Because otherwise you start to really get into like the 6-7 figures of time wasting. And, the larger the team, the more important requirements become, because it is your sense of direction. It is the instruction manual for what role I play, what role Chris plays, what role John plays, what role external consultants play. Because otherwise, how the heck are we supposed to know? I could say, you know what? I think I'm just going to redesign the website. Okay, Chris, you could do that, right? Yeah, sure. Why not? And then we find ourselves, 6 months from now, having gotten nothing done because the things that I had in mind were not compatible with the skill sets that Chris might have in terms of his ability to redesign a website. Now, this is just like a very basic example, but the point being is that having some sense of requirements tells you this is the team that I'm going to need. This is part of my tech stack that I'm going to need access to. If I don't have access to it, I better start now. I better put in that request to IT and tell them why I need it. This is the process, the repeatability of how I'm going to approach this thing. And then this is the desired outcome. And then this is what my end user expects the thing to be. Did I do the thing? And this is how I know it was successful.
Suppose you have a carpenter, a plumber, and an electrician, and you don't have a blueprint. What kind of house are you going to get?
They walk into a bar.
They do walk into a bar, and they all order.
Okay, go. Sorry.
But no, you have a carpenter, a plumber, and an electrician. What kind of house are you going to get if you don't have a blueprint? I mean, assuming that they even agreed to do the work at all. Because one of the things that's happening is we're seeing, obviously, it's talent is a major crunch right now, and mid-level talent, particularly managers, we are seeing leaving the fields of marketing and business in droves, which is causing a lot of severe issues of companies, which means that more and more agency partners are being brought in to help backfill jobs, positions, and tasks within companies. Requirements gathering is important inside your company. Requirements gathering is mandatory if you're working with agencies, particularly if you're working with one or more agencies, because again, like the carpenter, the plumber, and the electrician, if you don't have a blueprint, nobody knows what they're supposed to build. You're going to get people doing all sorts of crazy things, and eventually you're going to be that one person who somehow managed to get their main electrical wiring put through their bathtub, and it's going to be a very, very short bath.
It sure is. What's interesting is as you're giving that example, my first thought is, well, who's telling them when to stop and how much money they're allowed to spend? Because that's going to be because basically you're giving these people free reign to do whatever. Because you're like, I don't know, just make me a house. And they're going to build you a house, but you have not given them those parameters to say, and stop when you get to $30,000. What can $30,000 get me? Not the house that I was thinking. You're definitely not going to have heated floors in your bathroom. You're definitely not going to have central air. You're definitely not going to have, a greenhouse attached to your house. Like, oh, okay, well, I wanted those things. Well, you don't have the budget for them. Or, or you say, just build me a house, and you get all those things, and then you get $1 million bill. Like, no thanks.
Resource constraints are a part of requirements gathering. How long do we have to do this? How many people, how many man hours, what tooling do we have? One of the things, for example, going back to the beginning of the show with the fan project that I'm working with, the budget is essentially, it's like $35,000 total, most of which they're using to buy a billboard in Los Angeles. The effective operating budget is $0, right? So the question then becomes, they have some ideas, but they don't have a budget to support those ideas in the traditional form that we would normally do them. So how do you do that given that budget constraint? And that's part of requirements gathering that comes before setting pen to paper is, okay, well, what resources do you have? There's plenty of people that have talent, but they don't necessarily have tools, and there's certainly no money for advertising or other traditional marketing techniques. So what can you bring to bear? Open source products, right? Public data sets, all these things that are freely available, but you need to gather up and build yourself. It'd be very different than, say, if Cisco Systems or Citrix Systems or VMware or somebody said, hey, we got $44 million and 2 months of time to build this thing. Can you build it for us?
Resource restrictions is a really interesting piece of this. So if you've ever done software development, then you may be familiar with sprint planning with Agile methodology. Sprint planning is essentially requirements gathering for the upcoming sprint, which is roughly 2 weeks. There are restrictions on time in that instance. And so let's say I have a long list of things on my backlog that I want to have done. Well, I can't get them all done because there's a restriction on time in terms of how many resources I have available over the next 2 weeks. That's essentially 80 hours. What can I do in 80 hours and get something that is, that I can show as a demonstration that's a prototype of something or a finished product? And that's where requirements gathering really comes into play, because I can't get everything I want. We're not even talking budget yet. We're still talking about the actual physical man hours that somebody can, create this thing. So let's say I have, I want a house built, and I have 2 weeks, and I'm giving them 2 weeks to do it. I'm not getting a whole house. I'm either going to get a really shoddy house that's going to fall down in the storm, or I'm going to get maybe a foundation, maybe a wall at the end of 2 weeks. I have to start to make those choices of what is the most important thing that I want to see at the end of that time constraint, that resource constraint. And that's where having those requirements to set the expectation of, here's what I want to build. Here's sort of the, pie in the sky idea of, features and bells and whistles. And then here's the baseline of what I can absolutely tolerate in terms of the low level version of this thing. And then you start to, as you find, okay, so this came together faster than we thought it would, we can start to add on to it. versus going into that, like 1,000-foot view level, the greatest thing in the whole world, and finding out you can't execute it.
And time is immutable. There's an old joke that it says 9 people can't make a baby in a month, right? Because it takes a person to gestate a human child in 9 months. Though a more typical answer, again, going back to our Friendly Bartender's book, you have a party tomorrow night, you got 40 people, you need ice for your drinks, right? It doesn't matter how expensive your freezer is. You are not making 40 pounds of ice between now and then in the freezer that you have. You either have to go buy it, or you need to plan ahead like a week in advance and maybe making ice that whole time so that by the time the party rolls around, the morning of, there just isn't time. Even if you had, the best freezer in the world, you just can't make ice faster than ice will naturally freeze. I mean, yes, there's like all sorts of, silly things you could do, but in the context of most normal people in their homes, it just isn't going to happen. And so that time constraint as part of business requirements is one of those things where, you can't buy more time.
That's right. You could add more people, but to your example, Chris, it doesn't necessarily change anything. It's funny that you bring that up because that was always the, quote unquote solution that my stakeholders give us. What if we add more people to this project? Can we get it done? Then can we get it done? I was like, nope. It literally would make it take longer. It's definitely not a solution. So I think the point being, if you are looking to scale, if you are looking to save money, both things are important, then business requirements, the time it takes to write up even basic requirements of, what's the question I'm trying to answer? Who's involved in this thing? How am I going to get it done? What tools and technology do I need? And then what is my measure of success? Answer those 5 basic questions and you have yourself a set of requirements. Because then you at least can go, as I'm looking at this, I realize that I'm probably going to need someone who understands machine learning. Nobody on my team does that. So I need to rethink this plan. Or I need to invest in someone who understands machine learning. Or, I really think I need 3 years worth of data. We only have 18 months worth of data. So what am I going to do? I need to rethink this plan. And it gives you the opportunity, if nothing else, to just pause for a second and say, is this a good idea? Is this a realistic idea? Is this an executable idea? Is this something that I can say when I'm done, yes, I did the thing, or no, I didn't do the thing?
As the famous quote from Jurassic Park goes, scientists were so concerned about whether they could, they never stopped to ask whether they should.
It's true.
If you've got some stories you want to share about requirements gathering and things you've done to make business requirements more profitable, pop on over to our free Slack group. Go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, where you and over 3,000 other marketers are asking and answering each other's questions every single day. And wherever it is you watch or listen to the show, if there's a channel you'd rather have it on instead, go to trustinsights.ai/TI podcast, where we probably have it available for you. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.